But we're in a very negative demographic generational cycle of spending. And this is the reason. We have seen what I call monetary meth now. That's my latest term, okay? We're living in monetary meth. Ever since the 2008 financial crisis in early 2009, this was the worst downturn we've seen since the Great Depression, and at least relatively on par with 80 to 82. This was a shock. We got spoiled. And so governments reacted, and what they did was they just printed money. The US government printed $1 trillion right there in 2009, that first year. And you know what? I would have said yes to that. We're in a deep downturn. Yes, you want things to restructure. You want business to get more efficient. You want to knock out zombie companies and unproductive debts. That's a very fruitful thing that economists don't really recognize, okay? They don't like recession. But you don't want recessions to get crazy and get out of control. So that first trillion, yes. After that, monetary meth. We've been living in this whole new world. And I'll tell you what, and I learned this from Dr. Lacey Hunt. If you ever get to listen to him, if you ever hear him talking, listen to this guy. He is a PhD economist, okay? And a damn good one. And he's the guy who first explained money velocity to me way back in, I think, the late 80s or something. He says it shows how productively you're investing money. Money, once you invest it, will only continue to grow if you make profits and continue to reinvest profitably. If it doesn't, it'll take more and more money to create less and less and less. Well, guess what the money velocity's been doing since 1997, right when the bubble started, the first tech bubble, 95 to 2000, okay? Bubbles are always a sign of speculative and unproductive investment, and that sort of stuff, okay? That's when money velocity started to drop like a rock. It is still dropping into 2022. That is the telltale indicator. And bubbles always see this, and bubbles always have the biggest crashes because the investment is so unproductive, and because bubbles encourage people to just invest wildly and financial assets go crazy. Okay, and that's what we've seen. When they started printing money like crazy in early 2009, people, oh my God, they're going to create inflation. No, we've only seen inflation recently. I'll get to that in a minute. What we saw was financial asset inflation. Financial assets today, I've just been researching this in depth and updating everything, close to $600 trillion. That's the biggest economic number in the world. And if you compare that to global GDP at 94 trillion in 2021, that is 6.4 times GDP. Historically, 2 times GDP is normal for that, and 3 is as high as it's gotten generally before this. So this is saying we're way out of that. This indicator, money velocity, is telling us it's dropping like a rock, that we're investing money unproductively, and that's going to eventually cause worse and worse investments, harder and harder to pay back the debts you borrow, and that's what causes a major downturn like the 1930s. We have not seen a downturn. Even in the 70s, that was a generational slowdown in spending, okay? And it was inflation, which is bad for markets, but it wasn't the Great Depression. Stocks went down 89%, the Dow, which would be more like the NASDAQ today, 89% in that Great Depression crash, okay? Way more than we've seen, even at the worst so far, okay? So what really drives generational demographic cycles, technology cycles, and what we've seen in recent years, right on prediction. I said back in the 80s, along with Sir John Templeton, he was the only guy as bullish as me. He really had his finger on globalization, and I had my finger on the emerging baby boom around the world. We were the most bullish guys back then. That is over. Now, the technology cycle just peaked in 2020. That's an important cycle. That has peaked as well. The geopolitical cycle's been down for a decade and a half. It is only starting to turn up, so about to be a bright spot, but nowhere there yet. We're in the worst fundamental place in our economy since we've been in the early 80s and in the early 1930s, and really more like the early 1930s. This is why governments have been printing money. They're covering over, hoping the economy will get its mojo back and then come back, and it never does. So what just happened? Here's the most important thing, and chew on this for a minute. So we get COVID after all this. Okay, that's what we need. COVID, the global virus going around, slowing everything down, keeping people from going to work, socializing, blah, blah, spending money. Yuck, 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 yuck. Well, that's when the central banks, particularly the Federal Reserve in the United States, really panicked. Now listen to this number. I had to check everything twice when I looked at it a couple of years ago. Between fiscal stimulus, which they haven't been doing for a long time, and monetary stimulus, which has simply been accelerating since the 2009 bottom, March 2009, printed $10 trillion in the US alone in 2 years. That's 46% of GDP. What? People don't know this. That's insanity. That is desperation. And you think, hey, if we were growing at 10% in the best economy, here we are 2 years later, and the economy's going into recession. And after this much stimulus, 10 trillion, 46% of GDP, we're already about to fall back in recession. So now they're looking at, well, now we need stimulus, but no, they have to tighten. Why do they have to tighten? Because they created an unexpected and non-fundamental sharp surge in inflation. Now, they've been printing money since 2009. We already know that. All the gold bugs are always saying, oh, it's going to cause inflation. No, because workforce growth, the real indicator for inflation, and I've got the best inflation indicator in the world, and it says we've been going down since 1980, and we should be at about 1% today, and we'll be somewhere 1-2%, 0 to 2 for as far as you can see. Inflation's dead because workforce entry is slowing around the world. Why entry for inflation? Because it costs a fortune to raise a kid and then incorporate them in the workforce. And the last people are businesses that have to get them an office and training. So we have this spike in inflation, and now it calls their bluff. Now they're forced to tighten. Now, what's Jerome Powell in the United States and central bankers thinking? Hey, economy's been strong. Yeah, inflation's out of control. We can handle this. I am predicting we can't handle this because my real indicator, the spending cycles of generations, the spending wave, says we're still going into the bottom of a downturn in natural spending that started in 2008 and will not turn up until 2024. So this is a time when the fundamentals are still weak, and all we need is something to go wrong, and we could be in a crash faster than governments can counter it, okay? That's the trick, because it is hard to fight central banks when their ethos, starting with Mario Draghi, by the way, he's the first guy that when the crisis happened in 2008-9 in Europe, he said, you want to be a short seller and bet against our countries? I will blow you out of the water. I will print enough money to blow you short sellers out of the water. Well, they've been doing that ever since.